Nothing but the blood of Jesus. For my cleansing this I plead. Nothing but the blood of...
Let me invite you to turn this morning to James chapter 5. James this morning is going to be speaking to the most wealthy people, the richest people in the world. In the times of James, the middle class was almost unknown. Either you had a lot of money or you had none. There were those who lived in great palaces and there were those who lived in shanty towns. Very little of a middle class. So he's going to be speaking to these rich people this morning. And I know what you're thinking. James has been very personal. And so you're sitting back this morning going, phew. I can just sit back and let James talk to someone else. Because surely he's not talking about me. James hasn't seen my bank account. He doesn't know what my house looks like. Go ahead, James. Let those rich people have it. But James is also speaking to you. And he's speaking to me this morning. Let me show you some statistics. Here. If you make $60,000 a year, you're the upper 0.2% in the world. That's not the 1%. That's the upper 20%. If you make $50,000, you're in the upper 0.3%. If you make $40,000, you're in the upper 0.6%. Now you turn on the debates, everybody's talking about the 1%, right? If you make $20,000 a year, that puts you in the upper 4% of everyone in the world. And if you make $10,000 a year, you're in the upper 16%. You make more money than 84% of all the people in the world. $10,000. It is true that the rich people in James's day, they lived in great palaces, had land that we could only imagine. But let me tell you what they did not have. They didn't have central heat. They didn't have air conditioning. They couldn't walk over to a spigot and turn a knob and water come out. They didn't have access to cold water. They did not have refrigerators in their homes, nor did they have freezers. They went everywhere on foot or been towed by a donkey or a camel. They couldn't imagine traveling as comfortably and quickly as we do. It is no hyperbole that we today live in luxury, personal luxury that kings could not have even dreamt of. And so, yes, James is speaking to those rascals in his day. But he also has a word for you and me this morning, I believe. In James chapter 5, beginning verse 1, James writes this. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you, and will consume your flesh like fire. It is the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, which have been withheld by you, cries out to you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and have led a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you. Before we begin to kind of tear what James is saying here apart, let me quickly say that this is one of the most peculiar passages in all the New Testament. James here, kind of out of the blue, summons his Old Testament prophet. And while these words seem very peculiar and odd to our ears from the New Testament, this is the language of an Old Testament prophet, where he condemns all those around him, particularly as they are bringing injustice upon the neighbors. And people have wondered, well, to whom is James speaking here? And most, and I agree here, that he's speaking to those outside the church. He's speaking to lost people here. Why do we say that? Well, first of all, is that notice that in verse 6 he speaks about they're the ones who's condemning the righteous. They're not righteous themselves. And then if you look at verse 7, which we'll look at next week, Lord willing, that it says, therefore be patient, brethren. He's speaking now to the church. But like I said, these are good words for you and me this morning, because he's speaking here about what wealth does to a person. And I see here 4 things that wealth will do to you and to me if our money possesses us rather than we possessing our money. The very first thing is this, is that money, that wealth will fool us. It's been said that money talks, and that is true, but most of the time when money talks, it lies. And it lies here about what is our genuine wealth. There's an old German theologian from the early part of the 20th century by the name of Oscar Cullmann. And Oscar Cullmann once told this illustration. He said that the world is like a department store into which thieves broke into one night. But the thieves, instead of stealing things out of the department store, what they did was they rearranged all the price tags, so that the things which are the cheapest and the least valuable, they have the highest price tags now. And the things which are most valuable now in our day has the least, or considered the least valuable. And that's exactly what we find here. We find here people who look at their riches based on what they have. Oh, I must be rich because look at the luxurious things I have. I must be rich because look at my car, look at my home. I must be rich because look at the jewelry that I have. Look at the surroundings that we have. And these things begin to fool us. Oh, the poorest man in the world is only the one who has money. And this can happen to Christians. If you advance the slide one time, remember this word of our Lord Jesus to the church at Laodicea. He says, because you say, I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing. Here's this church who look around and say, my goodness, aren't we doing well? Look at the great building that we have. Look at the great architecture that we have. Look at the people that we have here. Look at how they're dressed. Look at the offerings that we're bringing in. My goodness, we're rich, we're wealthy, we have need of nothing. And our Lord Jesus looks at them and says, do you not know that you're wretched and miserable, and you're poor, and you're blind? and you're naked. At the church at Laodicea, the riches have blinded them, has fooled them. And so it is in our day, because not only does it fool us as far as our wealth is concerned, it also fools us concerning as what our security is. We base our security on how much we're going to be having coming in. I know this is something that has been on our mind. We're reaching a point where we can see retirement in the distant future, but nevertheless, we can see the finish line coming, and we're going to say, well, how much is going to be coming in? And we think of that's our security. But look at what happens to their security. In verses 2 and verses 3. In James's day, wealth was seen in 3 different ways. One is your wealth if you had lots of stored grain. You know, there were not supermarkets like there are today. There are not refrigerators. But if you could go to your there and open up and look at all the food that you had, you said, oh, boy, I'm secure. Lots of times in Jesus' day, people had one set of clothes. But here these rich had great closets full of clothes. The rich, of course, had currency, gold and silver. But look at what Jesus says. He reminds them that 1 second, one eye blink after this world ends and you're standing in the next, what will happen to everything that you have accumulated in this life? Well, look at here. It says in verse 2, you think that you're rich because you have grain. Well, what's happened to the grain? It's rotted. You think you're rich because you have all these clothes. Well, what happened to the clothes? Well, they're moth-eaten. What happened to all that money that you had in the bank account? Well, it's gone. If the only thing that you have as far as security is concerned is what you can look at in your closet or in your bank account, oh my goodness, you have nothing. Because it will all be gone the moment that you close your eyes and you leave this world and you go to the next. Do you hear me? And that day is coming swiftly upon us, and it fools us as far as time is concerned. James says here, it's the last days that you've been storing this up. James was expecting the Lord to come back any moment. That's been 2,000 years. Jesus stayed away a little bit longer than the New Testament, I think, had kind of hinted at. But you know what? The majority of these of Christ Reformed Baptist Fellowship, the majority of us in here, well, a good portion of us in here, we're going to be standing before the Lord in 20 years. Do you know that? It's coming quickly. And we're wasting our time storing up things that's going to bring no safety in that day. But not only does wealth fool us, he says here, wealth begins to change us. And it makes us greedy. Wealth is the one thing that the more you have, the more you want. J.R.R. Tolkien was a Christian. And he was the one who wrote Lord of the Rings. And in the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings, he introduces us to a man by the name of Smeagol. Anyway, Smeagol, there we go, thank you. He turned out to be, he was just an ordinary little fellow, fisherman, but he finds this ring. And he's so enamored by this ring, so greedy for this ring, it changes him. And the only thing he cares about is this ring. And that's what it is with us when we begin to possess, and our wealth possess us. The more we have, the more we want. And the more we have, the more we want. We don't really want anyone to get what we have. That's what James means here. He says that you are wealthy, and yet the laborers, you're not paying them. You're holding from them because you don't want to get rid of what you have. One summer when I was in seminary in Texas, to help pay bills and help us survive, I became a Domino's pizza delivery man at night. I worked for the seminary during the day, then I delivered pizzas at night. And at that time, where our store was, it's in the Hewland area of southwest Fort Worth. It was the largest Domino's pizza store in the world. So I know that you're amazed by that. I put that on my resume sometimes. And that part of Fort Worth, the store sat right between two different communities. It sat on one side was the barrio, heavily Hispanic area. And across the road was a very rich section of Fort Worth. And so I deliver pizzas both to the barrio and to the rich section of town. And at night, sometimes I will confess, I walked very gingerly. I learned the Psalms very well, delivering pizzas there in the barrio. But I was only there for a couple of about a week or so. I began to see a pattern. Every time I delivered a pizza to the poor areas, they'd always tip me. Mm-hmm. When I delivered a pizza to the rich areas, I rarely got a tip. I remember one time a lady brought out, and in the rich area, she handed me $1. And she said, "Do you have change for my tip?" I said, "That's okay." The more you have, the more you want to hold on to. And it's just not those people in Fort Worth, it's us too. Let me demonstrate. Let's say you have $10 in your pocket. A free $10. You can spend it any way you want to. And I come up to you and say, "Can I have $1?" What would you do? You'd open that wallet and you're glad to give your pastor $1, right? Glad to. Wouldn't it blink? Sure. I have $10, I'll give you one. Let me ask you, if you had $100, free and clear, you just $100. And I walk up to you and say, "Would you give me $10? You think, would you? You may even ask, "I don't know what you need $10 for?" But begrudgingly, you'd probably say, "Yeah, maybe he won't pray for me if I don't give him." So you give me $10. You follow me? Okay. If you had $1,000 in your pocket, free and clear, $1,000. I walked up to you and said, "Can I have $100? How many of you would give me $100? Sandra, write these names down. Okay? You begin to wonder, wouldn't you? What does he need $100 for? That's a lot of money. I don't want to give $100. If you had $10,000, and I walked up to you and said, "Hey, would you give me $1,000? If you're answering honestly, you see how the grip tightens here? The more we have, the more we want to hold on to it. Because when wealth possesses us, it begins to change us. And it changes us in not so many good ways. The next thing it does here is it makes us self-indulgent. That's what James says in here in verse 5. He said, you live luxuriously on the earth. It makes us lazy. I've seen this 1,000 times in church. They come and say, Pastor, I'm tired. I'm going to take a little time off. You think, well, that's a good thing. I'm going to come back really refreshed and ready to go. You know what happens? They get used to being off. I'm going to take a couple of Sundays off. You know what happens? You get used to being off on Sunday. It becomes self-indulgent. And the more that we hold into ourselves, the more it begins to corrupt who we are. When wealth possesses us. What James is painting here is a picture of a person that has been blessed with wealth and they're able to do much of whatever they want and able to do for others in ways that others could not do for themselves. And yet the wealth has fooled them. The wealth has made them greedy. And instead of taking time to bless others or the work of God or whatever as a fountain of good works, the fountain becomes stopped up. And it just destroys who we really ought to be. And finally, it makes us heartless. Look at verse 6. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. As I was preparing this message, I began to think, I want to find a couple of stories where people killed others for their inheritance. I began to read these stories and it became so sad and so heartbreaking that I didn't want to, my folks don't need to hear that. But each of these young men here, they are one of thousands who killed either their parents or the sibling or their grandparents just to get what they have. Can you imagine that? Growing up and becoming so self-indulgent, so greedy. The wealth blinded you so that you want to kill the one who loves you the most just to get an inheritance, just to get a little more wealth. And one story that Sanjay and I have followed for years is the story of James Brown. James Brown had 6 different women and 20 different children, all wanting literally a piece of James Brown. After James Brown died, his corpse was moved 14 different times because one of his children or women said that what he has is mine. Doctors had to literally go in and cut pieces off of him to do paternity test on him. It took a couple of years for him to be buried. Now, I read something last night, is that we're not even sure if he's actually buried yet or not. Greed makes you hurt. We think of wealth as a blessing. Do you know what wealth is? Wealth is a fire. At your home, if you have fire in the fireplace, it's a good place for it to be, and it brings warmth and does lots of good things in the fireplace. But that same fire gets into the middle of the living room, then it brings destruction. You know, we've all prayed, perhaps, or wished or thought about what would happen if I won the lottery. Do you know what happens to most people who win the lottery? They go broke and they become lonely because everybody wants a piece of them. The best story I know about the lottery is this, is there's a 17-year-old in Great Britain who won the lottery. She eventually sued the lottery company, said, it's your fault, you're so foolish for giving a young woman like me money. Because it destroyed her life, destroyed her family. She ended up penniless, and she ended up without anyone around her. Because money is a fire. Wealth is a fire. If it's in the fireplace, wonderful, but once it gets out of the fireplace, it destroys everything it touches. So I'd like to say to you this morning from the book of James is this. I want to say thank you. Christ Reformed Baptist Fellowship has been amazingly faithful, remarkable in your stewardship. At the end of this month, we'll show you another financial snapshot, and I can only say thank you. We've kept the fire in the fireplace. But at the same time, if we think that our security as a fellowship rests on what is in a bank account somewhere, if our measure of how we're doing are numbers in a checkbook, we have become blind and foolish. So we who are rich, we who are that upper 1% of everyone in the world, let's use what God has given us and use it by His grace and use it for His glory. Amen? Let's pray together.